Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, Toni Preckwinkle, the president of the Cook County Board, speaks at the City Club of Chicago about her vision for state and Cook County government. She also criticizes the leadership of President Trump and Governor Rauner and defends her so-called sweetened beverages tax in Cook County. Then in 40 minutes, we talk to Bob Myers, the president of the Associated Beer Distributors of Illinois, about the beer distributors' standards they use to protect consumers from unsafe and tarnished alcohol. In 50 minutes, we talk to Martin Marr, the Illinois Corn Director for District 10 of the Illinois Corn Growers Association, about the issues affecting Illinois' corn industry. Following that in 1 hour, we first talk to Liz Moranstelk, the Executive Director of the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, about the growth of Illinois' farmers' markets throughout the state. We'll then talk to Rebecca Osland, the Policy Associate with the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, about Governor Rauner's recent legislation that has made it easier for people to sell their products at farmers markets. And finally, in 1 hour and 20 minutes, we sit down with Alan Manning, author of Father Lincoln, the untold story of Abraham Lincoln and his boys. Manning describes Lincoln's relationship with his children and how being a father affected his presidency. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. For over 80 years, we've represented the interests of those who work in the Illinois trucking industry. We work with members of the legislature to pass laws to help make the roads safer, to help keep Illinois trucking competitive, and to help provide ongoing educational opportunities for those in our industry. The technology of trucking is forever changing. So too are the laws regulating the trucking industry. That's why the Illinois Trucking Association is proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel, which keeps citizens around Illinois connected to what's happening in state government and what changes are being discussed that will impact their families, their communities, their future. And the Illinois Channel gives those of us in industry an opportunity to share our thoughts on public policy with our fellow citizens across Illinois. I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council on Transportation. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Chicago, Toni Preckwinkle, the president of the Cook County Board, speaks at the City Club of Chicago about her vision for state and Cook County government. She also criticizes the leadership of President Trump and Governor Rauner and defends her so-called sweetened beverages tax in Cook County. This runs about 40 minutes.
Good morning. Good morning. I want to thank Jay for that kind introduction, and I want to thank the City Club for the opportunity it presents to share information from elected officials like me and from other civic leaders. I usually say politics is public education, and surely the City Club is engaged in public education as well. So thank you, Jay, and to all the board members who are here today for your good work. I appreciate it. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge all of my staff members who are here. If you would stand, please. I'm very grateful for your help and support. I also want to acknowledge again, I'm not sure that we acknowledged Hill Hammock, who's chair of the board of our health and hospital system. I want to acknowledge John Rogers, who's head of our Council of Economic Advisors. I really appreciate your good work, John. Thank you. Howard Males, who's head of our Economic Development Advisory Council. Thank you too, Howard. And last but not least, I want to acknowledge Dan Cronin. Dan is a friend and colleague. We've worked closely together on a regional economic development initiative that began, I think, in December of 2013. Is that right, Dan? Did we get that right? We could not have done it without the good work of all of our colleagues, but especially Dan Cronin in DuPage County, and I'm very grateful to him. This is an important effort to try to get all of the political, the economic development, business leaders in our region to collaborate to lift the entire region of northeastern Illinois. Thank you, Dan. I'm very grateful. So a lot has happened in the 11 months since I visited the City Club last. America elected Donald Trump, our president. The governor of Illinois has all but abdicated his core policy-making duties. And local leaders like me and like Dan find ourselves carrying much of the governing burden while also facing criticism of an electorate manipulated largely by one party to hate government, even as it provides them with vital benefits and services. People are living in fear across the country and across Cook County. Fear of deportation, fear of losing their health insurance, fear of being shot because of the color of their skin or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. 2017 has been a difficult year, and now more than ever, I find myself looking for the light, asking the question, who are we? Who are we as Americans? Who are we as a community here in Cook County? And who are we as political leaders navigating a new era when faith in government institutions has never been lower and the need for effective and compassionate government has never been greater? As you know, the last few weeks and months have been difficult for me politically. With a well-financed lobby, the beverage industry, spending millions of dollars against a tax I fought for. One that is supported universally by public health advocates. Rather than discourage me, this fight has refocused me and challenged me to better articulate my core beliefs about who we are in Cook County and what Cook County government does. So today I'd like to reflect on this political moment, to restate my values as a leader and vigorously defend the work and purpose of Cook County government, which is more important now than ever before. Because as Republicans in Washington and Springfield continue their systematic assault on the social safety net, our role in providing a critical backstop for our most vulnerable residents is essential and worth every penny. I believe we have a moral and fiscal obligation to make sure that all of our residents have access to health insurance and quality health care. I believe that young people in this country have been let down by government in many ways, like being used as political pawns in a cynical fight over public school funding, for example. These young people deserve a fair and equitable shake in our criminal justice system so they can make a more promising, productive future for themselves. Investing in communities isn't just about lifting up the people who live there. It's about lifting up the whole county and region, because our economic successes are deeply intertwined. The most successful regions in this country have the least inequality among their residents. When individuals are underutilized or whole communities are written off, our county is weaker and our economic potential is diminished. We've let government become a bad word. We've let people who say we should run government like a business use that as a cover for divesting from the social safety net. These people believe it makes economic sense to allow people to fall into financial hardship because one illness bankrupts them, or because they can't afford bail on a minor charge that keeps them in jail when they needn't be. Well, guess what? We've seen where this run government as a business approach takes us when we actually put businessmen in charge. Businessmen like Governor Bruce Rauner or President Donald Trump. It seemed to me that both of these men have been surprised, although to different degrees, to discover that good governance takes hard work, negotiation, and compromise. Good governance also means considering the whole as opposed to the most privileged parts, special interests whose voices are loudest because their wallets speak for them. I've watched in horror, although not shock, as President Trump and his top messengers have attacked the fundamental values of our nation by legitimizing white supremacists, vilifying immigrants, trivializing suffering, attacking our healthcare system, denying climate change, dismantling civil rights gains and voting protections, and last but not least, questioning the morals of Chicagoans. Because it's easier to defame us than to address the complex social and political history that contributes to our challenges. Meanwhile, in Illinois, the governor forced the legislature to override a veto to end a 736-day budget standoff that jeopardized our state's fiscal solvency, threatened our public education system, especially our higher education institutions. This unprecedented and needless obstruction jammed leaders like me and places like Cook County, which had to budget around the shortfalls we knew we'd face because the governor refused to do his job and make tough choices necessary to fund our state government. It's against this political backdrop that I'm especially proud of what we've been able to accomplish in 7 years. While the state went 736 days without a budget, Cook County has passed a balanced budget each of the 7 years of my tenure. We closed $1.8 billion in budget gaps. Let me repeat that, $1.8 billion. Thank you. While responsibly shrinking our workforce by 10%. Additionally, with the help of the expanded insured population created by the Affordable Care Act, we've not only improved health care delivery, but we've also reduced the taxpayer allocation to the Cook County Health and Hospital System by $300 million on an annual basis. That's down 75% from the $400 million taxpayer allocation when I took office in 2010. President Trump says he's waiting for Obamacare to fail. Well, Cook County is a national leader in making the Affordable Care Act succeed. Of the 350,000 new Medicaid patients in Cook County, 140,000 of them get their coverage, their care, through Cook County's managed care program, County Care. Additionally, our system provides 45%, almost half, of all the charity care in the county. 45% of all the charity care, even though our hospitals are only a few of the 72 hospitals located within Cook County. These numbers are significant, but they don't tell the whole story of our success as well as our patients do. We know from our health and hospital system stories of patients whose lives are being transformed by the services we provide. I'm going to give you a couple examples. Margot, a county care member, was the victim of domestic violence and found herself uninsured when she left her husband. Through the advice of her advocate at the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services, she applied for county care. Psychiatrists at Heartland Health Outreach identified and treated Margot's post-traumatic stress disorder and suicidal tendencies, prescribing medication and intensive therapy to get her life back on track. Then, as a result of finally having health insurance, Margot consulted a dermatologist for spots on her face that had worried her for months. They were precancerous. Through her county care coverage, she received 10 weeks of topical chemotherapy that eradicated her skin cancer growth cells. Margot often says, when people talk about the difference between life and death as it relates to Medicaid coverage, I'm living proof. Another county care member, Mary Jo from the south suburbs, says her neighbors were shocked to learn that she was on Medicaid. Because despite the political caricature of Medicaid patients, they're not defined by geography, race, or gender. They're often our neighbors. Mary Jo suffered from chronic pain and through a process of applying for disability was able to maintain the continuity of coverage and care through Cook County. She tells her neighbors that without the intervention of doctors at Stroger Hospital, she might be dead. These stories are important because the Cook County Health and Hospital System is not only about providing top-notch health care at our hospitals, although we do that. Stroger this year was reclassified as a Level 1 trauma center and recognized by U.S. News and World Report as a high-performing cardiac hospital. Cook County Hospital is also the standard bearer in improving care and care coordination, investing in community health, and pursuing innovative partnerships with nonprofits and community groups so that our residents are healthier. Just last week, I visited the Jorge Prieto Family Health Center in Little Village, one of 11 county health clinics that are regularly visited by a fresh food truck run through a partnership between our healthcare system and the Greater Chicago Food Depository. At these visits, our patients, who are identified by us as food insecure, receive 20 to 25 pounds of fresh produce. The Food Depository has said this screening process is vital in transforming the health of county residents. Through June of 2017, we've distributed almost 140,000 pounds of fresh produce to more than 5,000 families. Our health and hospital system also has launched a medical legal partnership, again through screening our county care and system patients for various insecurities, including housing and food. The county then connects these patients with lawyers at the Legal Assistance Foundation, LAF, who can help them secure civic legal aid or benefits, such as Medicaid, admittance to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, housing assistance, as well as assistance with income, employment, or immigration issues. I mention these two programs because they contribute to the idea that if we are good stewards of public health, our work moves outside hospitals and into communities. I read a piece last month in Health Affairs magazine by two former leaders of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, who outlined the need for local public health officials to view public health initiatives as critical infrastructure. Just as we talk about our nation's crumbling roads and bridges, they wrote, we need to maintain the natural and historic bridge between healthcare and the community by linking health systems with organizations focused on health-linked social factors. Everyone sees potholes in the road and wants them filled. Just because we can't see food insecurity that leads to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease doesn't mean we shouldn't invest in public health programs to make our communities stronger. I was especially interested to read that these two doctors and policy leaders suggested that a potential funding mechanism for a nationwide investment in public health could be a national tax on sweetened beverages, citing the role of federal taxes on tobacco in funding Medicaid's Children's Health Insurance Program, widely known as CHIP. As we think about how the county provides a critical safety net for our most vulnerable residents, I would be remiss if I did not mention our progress and leadership in criminal justice reform. I've often said that the county jail lies at the intersection of racism and poverty. That to consider who and how and why people, especially young people of color, end up in jail helps us reflect on our larger failings as a society. I was proud to stand with juvenile justice advocates and members of the Illinois House last week as we celebrated the signing of a law on expungement for juvenile records that we'd worked hard for. This juvenile expungement law is the fourth landmark win for us in helping young people get second chances they need to go on and live more productive adult lives. In 2014, we supported a law that raised the age of jurisdiction to include 17-year-olds charged with felonies. Previously, the age had been 16. In 2015, we fought for reforming the automatic transfer law that has reduced the number of young people being sent to adult court by 73%. And let me just say, our adult courts focus on punishment. Our juvenile courts focus on rehabilitation. So as many young people we can keep in the juvenile system as possible, the better off we are. And in 2016, we advocated for and won the end of mandatory 5-year probation for juveniles. To finish my remarks today, I'd like to tackle a few more contentious points I know you're all wondering about. I've fielded plenty of media questions lately, and I'm sure I will after this speech too, about whether or not I think the Board of Commissioners will vote to repeal the sweetened beverage tax, perhaps as soon as this afternoon. I reject the framing of the question. In my view, this isn't a vote to repeal or keep a revenue source we already approved. It's about whether or not we want Cook County to be healthier, safer, and more efficient, or if we're willing to go backwards and let Cook County be sicker, less safe, and less efficient. To any commissioner considering this action, I remind you that a vote to repeal is a vote to fire frontline health care providers, doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals who help serve our most vulnerable patients. A vote to repeal is a vote to halt plans for a new lifestyle center at Providence Hospital, where I was yesterday. This center is designed to promote better health outcomes for our patients while also saving us money in the long term, because treating acute and chronic illnesses is much more expensive than preventing them. A vote to repeal is a vote to compromise our constitutional duty to provide for the legal defense of those who cannot afford counsel by taking away money from the Public Defender's Office and forcing our already overworked public defenders to absorb another 6,400 cases. A vote to repeal is a vote to reduce our community investments, especially in workforce development training programs geared at young people on the south and west sides. Our Cook County programs like Career Launch, Opportunity Works, and the Conservation Corps together have helped us connect hundreds of Cook County young people between the ages of 16 and 24 to employment training and jobs. In my view, the choice is simple. I will choose to protect our safety net and essential services every time. My sincere hope is that our commissioners will do the same. But I understand and empathize with the immense pressure commissioners face as a result of the coordinated and expensive campaign that the soda industry is running against us. I'd like to leave you, however, with one last thought on Big Soda as they make their push to repeal this tax. I've been thinking a lot about what Michelle Obama said earlier this year about the Trump administration rolling back the healthy lunch program she implemented as First Lady. She said, "Think about why someone is okay with your kids eating crap. Why would you celebrate that? Why would you sit idly and be okay with that? Because here's the secret. If somebody is doing that, they don't care about your kid. So why is Big Soda okay with selling vulnerable kids liquid sugar, which we know is bad for them? The answer, of course, is because it's their business. The only reason this tax is disproportionately appears to affect poor communities is because Big Soda has spent decades preying on them. The soda industry doesn't care about public health in these communities. It's just about using them as pawns in a losing fight to maintain revenue. I have to acknowledge that it's hard to take the long view on the public's interest when faced with short-term political discomfort. But I'm not afraid to stand up for what I believe is right. And I'm not afraid to stand before you today and remind you why I'm here. I didn't run for this job because it was glamorous. I ran for this job because it's important and because it focuses on things I care about, principally the quality of health care we can deliver to the under and uninsured and the effectiveness and equity of our criminal justice system. I didn't pick this job because there was some kind of aura attached to it or because I viewed this as a stepping stone to another office. I picked it because I knew that I could make a difference, because I'm willing to work hard, because I've worked to build a great team that can help us make the county more effective. And I think that after a very long period where people didn't have confidence in county government, when they thought it was a patronage backwater, we've brought back respectability to the county and dramatically improved the quality of services we deliver. And I'm proud of that. And I'm going to try to do my best over the next 5 years to implement the changes that we started in 2010. That's my goal. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'll throw out a question at you, okay?
Go ahead.
You talked about Big Soda and the amount of money they've invested in trying to get a repeal. Would you care to comment on the involvement of the former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, in this issue?
I'd be happy to. First of all, I'm very grateful to Mayor Bloomberg. I don't personally have the resources to fight Big Soda, and so we're very grateful for his help. Across the country, he's made two issues, gun control, reasonable gun control laws, and sweetened beverage taxes, the issues that he has focused attention on and been willing to spend resources on. And I'm very grateful that he's engaged in the battle here in Cook County.
Okay, thank you. This is from Alderman Brian Hopkins of the 2nd Ward. Alderman, where are you? He just left. Of course. Leaves the question and he bugs out, and he's my alderman. How about that? Oh, okay. Thank you. The question is, when did the county last increase its property tax levy? Are you aware of any other unit of government that has gone that long without an increase?
Well, I think our residents in Cook County are a little confused sometimes because they see their property tax bills rise and they think that the county has increased its tax levy, when in fact the Cook County government has not increased its tax levy since the mid-90s. So it's been more than 20 years since Cook County raised its property tax levy. In that interval, of course, the city of Chicago, other cities, towns, and villages, and especially school districts, have raised their property tax levies, and people have seen their property tax bills rise. But in the case of Cook County government, it's more than 20 years since we last raised property taxes.
Thank you. This is from Julia Ellis, who's with Ellis Strategies, LLC. Madam President, you've talked about reforms of Cook County that led to a 10% decrease in the size of county government supporting the sales tax. Confusing question. Was repealed. How? I don't understand her question. Oh. Mea culpa, mea culpa. That led to a 10% decrease in the size of county government. Supposing the soda tax was repealed, how might the resulting cut compare in size and scope?
We faced a gap last year of about $174 million, and that's the reason that we proposed increasing revenue, and we chose a revenue source that we thought had positive health benefits as well. I'll give the example that Dr. Jay Shannon usually gives. In the 1960s, 42% of adults smoked, 42%, and the research, the health research, got more and more compelling about how bad smoking was for you. As a result, we applied taxes to cigarettes at the state level, at the federal level, at the city and county level. We ran a public education campaign about how bad smoking was, and we restricted the places people could smoke. So 42% in the 1960s, 50 years later, 19% of adults smoke. And it's not so much that adults stopped smoking as that young people didn't start smoking because cigarettes were so expensive. So there were very positive health benefits. Cuts of $200 million in our budget would be pretty devastating. It'd be laying off doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, state's attorneys and public defenders, jail guards. Almost all of our money is spent on personnel, and so when we take cuts in our budget, it means that we have to let staff go, and that means that programs and services suffer. So I can't tell you exactly how many people would be laid off. I know that last year when we looked at this, we were looking at 1,100 layoffs. It would this year alone. It would be more this year, and frankly, without revenue every year into the foreseeable future, it's more layoffs. And that means quite clearly programs and services are reduced, diminished, eliminated.
Thank you. Makes it a lot easier when you have your glasses. Thanks, Mr. President. I appreciate that. President Preckwinkle, looking back at when you and your staff first considered adopting the tax on drinks and that, did you anticipate the kind of pushback that we are currently seeing?
I think an honest answer to that is no. It's quite clear to me that sweetened beverages are not good for you. Apparently it's not clear to everybody. And so we have some work to do, not only about sweetened beverages and their impact on your health. By the way, yesterday when we were at Providence Hospital, at the closure of our press conference, a young woman in the back raised her hand and said she'd like to say a few words. She was a resident at Stroger Hospital, a pediatric resident, and she said she wanted to share that half the young people that she treats struggle with weight, with obesity. And she tells them, she said, this very diminutive person, you know, you've got to stop drinking sweetened beverages. That's where a lot of these empty calories come from. And we all know in many of our black and brown neighborhoods, the kids stop and get, you know, blue juice on the way to school, or those, what do you call them, those chip things. Pardon me? Yes, okay. Flaming Hots, that's it. My grandkids love them too, what can I tell you? Flaming Hots, right? Blue juice and Flaming Hots for breakfast, you know? It's cheap, but neither of them are good for you. And we have some real challenges in sharing with people the impacts of sweetened beverage consumption, the impacts for obesity and diabetes and tooth decay and heart disease, and at the same time sharing with them what the revenue goes for. What is it that county does? 46% of our budget is health care, 41% of our budget is criminal justice. So 87% of our dollars go into those two buckets. And we have to make the case for ourselves about the good work that we're doing in health care and the efforts that we're making around criminal justice reform, which impacts heavily, disproportionately, the same African American and Latino communities that are targeted by big soda.
Thank you. With regard to criminal justice reform, where do you, the state's attorney, and Sheriff Dart see the next pushes for reform in the system?
Well, our strategy is twofold. As I said earlier, we've been working hard in Springfield, and I have to credit my former chief of staff, now State's Attorney Kim Foxx, for that. When she came on board, she said, we've got to have a more robust presence and agenda in Springfield around criminal justice activity. We're working on it here internally, but we've got to change the laws in the state. And I cited 4 initiatives that have been successful in the last 4 years in Springfield. Reducing the number of young people transferred to adult court, keeping younger people in the juvenile justice system, that is raising the age, rather than sending them to adult court, eliminating mandatory 5-year probation, and then the most recent success, automatic expungements, you know, for arrests in which there's no conviction, for conviction for minor crimes. Those are all great things for our young people. I have to say, though, that we have not had the same level of success in the reform efforts that have been directed to adults. There's much more empathy and bipartisan willingness to deal with the challenges that young people face who are involved in the criminal justice system than adults who are involved in the criminal justice system. So what are we going to do? We're going to continue to work in Springfield, and we're going to continue to work together here at home. And I have to say that the Chief Judge, Tim Evans, the Sheriff, Tom Dart, the State's Attorney, Kim Foxx, the Clerk of the Court, Dorothy Brown, the Public Defender, Amy Campanelli, with my staff in the Justice Advisory Council, I'm deeply grateful to them, have been working together for a very long time. And we've had some substantial success, made some real progress. We've reduced the jail population by 25%, basically by helping those who are accused of nonviolent crimes spend the time between their arrest and the disposition of their case out in the community so they can work and support their families or go to school or whatever. And we've made significant changes in bond court, and we're about to make more, bond court being the port of entry into the criminal justice system. So we've got an agenda in Springfield that we're pursuing, and as I said, we've been much more successful on the juvenile side than the adult side, and we're continuing to work together cooperatively with all the actors in the criminal justice system around internal reforms to make our system more fair and effective. But it is still true that black and brown communities are disproportionately impacted by our criminal justice system. Latinos are 25% of the county's population. African Americans are 25%. 86% of the people in our jail are black and brown. And although the city of Chicago is half the population of the county, 80% of the people in our jail are from the city of Chicago. So the hyper-policing of black and brown neighborhoods continues to be a challenge, and the profound racism that we struggle with in this country is never more apparent than in what happens in our criminal justice system.
Thank you. This is from Jerry Peck with the IMA. He's not a member of the City Club. Jerry, we expect you to become a member. $50. You can afford it. Okay. Why are artificially flavored beverages taxed if we are concerned about calories?
Well, it turns out that the research shows that not just sugar-sweetened beverages, but artificially sweetened beverages aren't good for you either. And we decided the simplest way to do this was to cover all sweetened beverages. And that's what we've done in implementing the tax thus far. What are excluded? Water, 100% fruit juice, formula, milk products, better alternatives than sweetened beverages for people in terms of their health, and we think they were reasonable exemptions to our taxes.
Thank you. President, it appears that the original projections about what the amount of revenue that this, for want of a better term, soda tax would bring in were overinflated for a variety of reasons. If there is a significant shortfall, how do you propose to address that issue? Can we expect some new revenue proposals, perhaps a tax on baked goods and so on that would have sugar and be high in calories?
First of all, your premise is incorrect.
I'm glad.
You said the projections were overinflated. And the fact of the matter is we haven't gotten any revenue from this yet. We started the tax in August 2nd. The receipts aren't due until September 20th, so we'll have no idea how we're really doing until after September 20th. So to say that the revenue projections were overinflated on the basis of no evidence is pretty interesting. I'm sorry, this is kind of Alice in Wonderland, you know. We don't know how much money we've gotten, but the projections are overinflated. Let me just say, we based our projections on the experiences that Berkeley had, because Berkeley has had a sweetened beverage tax for the longest amount of time. So there are issues initially, there are bumps in the road, there are issues initially about compliance. You know, you have to work with people. So the first couple of months, it's always kind of, bumpy. And then people kind of get into it. It's like any tax. It takes a while for people to fully comply. So we're not sure exactly how much money we're going to get. We'll see after September 20th, and then we'll make the appropriate adjustments. But, this trope that we've overinflated our revenues is just garbage because we don't know what the revenues are yet.
Okay, thank you. You know, one of the things that we really appreciate at the City Club when President Preckwinkle comes is you can ask her any question and you will get an answer. So let's give her a big round of applause.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Bob Myers, the president of the Associated Beer Distributors of Illinois, about the beer distributors' standards they use to protect consumers from unsafe and tarnished alcohol. This runs about 10 minutes.
Bob Myers, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. Recently, it's been in the news, some tourists going travels of late down to Mexico at some of the resorts, and tragically, there have been some individuals who have actually died, and it turned out because they were imbibing brand X alcohol. Apparently, some of these resorts were putting their own brew in some of the bottles and serving it to customers. It raises the question that we wanted to discuss with you: how secure are we in Illinois, but also in America? What is the process here to make sure that that sort of thing does not happen?
Well, the three-tier system makes sure that things like that never happen, not only in the state of Illinois, but in the United States itself. What you have is a regulatory system that tracks each and every bottle of alcohol. It's the most transparent and most accountable system out there. What you had in Mexico was a situation where some of these resorts were purchasing alcohol from manufacturers that they didn't even know. They weren't licensed manufacturers. They were just simply somebody on the street that was saying this is brand X alcohol and it's safe. There was no regulatory structure in place to make sure that that product was safe. With the three-tier system, the system that we have in Illinois, it is a system that only distributors may only purchase from licensed manufacturers. We make sure that that product is absolutely safe before it enters into the marketplace. Once we receive that product, we then give it to only licensed retailers. So licensed retailers may only purchase that product from us, and we may only purchase that product from licensed manufacturers. So at no time there's any counterfeit alcohol out there.
And when we talk about retailers, of course, we can visualize going into a convenience store kind of thing, but that also applies, I would guess, to restaurants and bars and those kind of things.
Absolutely. Any place that sells alcohol legally in the state of Illinois, it has to go through the three-tier system, and that system protects the consumers. Not only does the three-tier system protect the consumer, but also the distributors, a distributorship that is independent, which they all are. Because of the fact that they're independent, they are able to give the consumers the most variety out there. You don't have situations where a large manufacturer has control over that distributorship. That distributorship determines which products it's going to carry. They are not solely required to only carry that product exclusively. The distributor can carry any product that it wishes, and that's the reason why you see so many of these craft brands out there. You go to your local grocery store and you go through the soda pop aisle, you're going to see probably two brands. You're going to see a Coke and you're going to see a Pepsi. Okay, go through in that same grocery store, go through your beer aisle, and you're going to see hundreds of different labels, different brands, things like that. That's the reason why you have that, is because of the fact that distributors are independent. They can bring consumers much more variety. But on the same token, on the same hand, you've got a situation where that consumer not only gets variety, but they are assured that the product that they are going to drink is safe and is the most fresh product available.
Actually, that was going to be my next question, which is that if we go in, you don't want to go in and buy some beer that was put on the shelf a year ago.
Right.
So who's responsible for making sure? Is it the convenience store who makes sure that product is moving and that you're not buying some out-of-date product?
That's a great question. It's distributors' responsibility, the distributor's responsibility to make sure that product is not what we call out of code. Generally speaking, you're looking at about a 90-day shelf life. There's some brands, obviously, that have longer, but generally speaking, it's about a 90-day shelf life. And it's the distributor's responsibility to check those code dates and to pull that product off the shelf so that those consumers receive the most fresh product available. So yes, it's the responsibility of the distributor, and we will exchange that product to the retailer without cost. It's exchange, without cost to the retailer. So we're making sure that that product is absolutely fresh.
And I would guess just as far as that the distributor keeps the inventory. If they know Bill's Convenience Store, to make up a name, if they got 10 cases and they only sold 8 and they had to take 2 cases back, maybe the next time he just drops off 8 instead of the 10, is something like that, so they know kind of what the demand is. Does it matter if on beer, if it's in cans or bottles as far as the shelf life? I'm just out of curiosity.
No, actually, it's not. You have code dates for both the can and the bottle. The bottles. It used to be years ago. It mattered. What kind of bottle was it? A clear bottle? Was it a green bottle? Was it a brown bottle? Today, it's pretty standard, a 90-day shelf life.
And when we look at these tragedies, as we discuss in Mexico, and of course you're representing the beer distributors, to your knowledge, is it the same as far as spirits and distribution of the liqueurs around the state?
With spirits and with wine, they also go through a 3-tier system, yes. So you would not have the situation that you have down in Mexico where it's a tainted rum or it's a tainted vodka or whatever the case may be. It does those products do go through a 3-tier system. The quality and check is in place here in the state of Illinois and in the United States. They don't have that, obviously, in countries such as Mexico and India and Russia and all these other places where you hear about retailers purchasing black market alcohol that's been tainted, and you don't see that in Illinois or in the United States like you do in other countries.
And then the other thing that really doesn't apply to the Mexican situation, but relative to the beer distributors and distribution of spirits, is part of that 3-tier system is that we don't allow someone who's 12 years old to go in and buy a beer, right?
Right, exactly right. We're one of those rare industries that the government tells us who we can sell to, when we can sell it, where we can sell it, how we can sell it, things of that nature. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. You need to have regulation with this product. We have to realize that alcohol is a drug. It's an intoxicant and can be abused. And with the 3-tier system, the regulatory system, that makes sure that, helps, I guess I should say, make sure that those products are not abused.
Yeah, at least a retailer is carding people. Frankly, even I've gotten carded of late. But on just a separate issue, and I'm kind of curious, we see one of the changes that we've seen in the beer industry over the last 10 years, I suppose, or so, is just this proliferation of the craft brews. And I'm just kind of curious, what are we to make of that? I guess as far as distribution, it probably doesn't matter too much, but is that picking up? Does that mean a decline of some of the major brands, or not? Maybe not. Maybe there's just more consumption. But is that having any impact one way or another, really, on the beer distribution industry?
Well, consumption is down for alcohol. I mean, there's no question about that. Unfortunately, there's only so much shelf space out there that's available. I think it's wonderful, though, that all these brands are coming up and all these different manufacturers. I mean, when I first started with ABDI back in 1993, there were literally 2 breweries. One was a brew pub, one was an actual brewer. Today, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 130 brewers. I mean, it's just grown exponentially. Of the craft, yeah, absolutely. So I think it's wonderful. I think it's good for the industry. I like the fact that our members can distribute just hundreds of different brands. It does give the consumer variety. It's gotten to the point where it's somewhat overwhelming when you walk into your local liquor store and you go through the beer aisle, or your local grocery store, and you go through the beer aisle and you see all the hundreds of different brands. I was talking to liquor store owner not too long ago, and they sell somewhere in the neighborhood of 33,000 different labels of beer. I mean, it's just amazing, you know. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'd like to see is more variety for the consumer.
And it goes back to your earlier point. You might be a name brand distributor. I mean, maybe to use a name, maybe Anheuser-Busch sets you up as a distributor, or but you're going to be carrying brands, as you say. They're an independent business, and so as you get these craft brews or different things, they're going to carry any number of products. It's not just the Anheuser-Busch.
Absolutely. You know, just because of the fact that your signature brand may be Anheuser-Busch, or your signature brand may be Miller or Coors, or whatever the case may be, because of the fact that in Illinois we do have independent distributors, those distributors can determine, you know, whatever brand of beer that they want to sell. I mean, if it's good beer, they're going to sell it. And there's a lot of good beer out there right now.
Myers, it's good to know that we have a line of protection that hopefully when people go to Mexico, they don't run into that anymore. But thank you for joining us and explaining the system.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Good to see you.
Next, from Decatur, we talked to Martin Marr, the Illinois Corn Director for District 10 of the Illinois Corn Growers Association, about the issues affecting Illinois' corn industry. This runs about 10 minutes.
Martin Marr, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel as we are here at the Farm Progress Show in Decatur. It's a great semi-annual, every other year it's here in Decatur, and it's a great place to showcase any number of farm issues and farm products. And on the subject of the Illinois Corn Growers Association, I would guess that exports is one of the things you deal with. What are some of the issues that are on your plate right now?
Well, right now, you know, the nutrient management issue is kind of forefront with everybody right now, especially coming into this fall. You know, fertilizer decisions have to be made, and everybody's kind of changing their plans to fit the needs today. So we environmentally do the best job that we can as stewards of the land.
When you talk about the nutrients issues, what would that involve? What do you?
Well, you know, there's a number of things going on. First of all, this is a collaborative effort with a lot of organizations throughout the state. I think that's the best way to handle this. You get a lot of good ideas brought in from a wide area of expertise. But some of the things we're looking at as an operation of our own here this year is really scrutinizing all our soil tests and making sure that we're not putting on any more than we have to, putting it on at the right place, using the right 4 R's, you know, the right source, right time, and the right place. And it's just a management decision that we need to make every year, and we need to readdress some of the ways and practices that we're doing. And one of those.
Let me see if I can set this up a little bit. Farmers, corn growers, would use a lot of nitrogen on the field. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And one of the concerns is the runoff. We get the heavy rains, especially in spring when you're fertilizing the field. There's some concern about the runoff going into different water reservoirs. Here in Decatur, it was an issue for a long time. So that's one of the issues from a environmental standpoint people are trying to address. And as I loosely understand it, one of the things that you're, over the last 20 years, working on, especially with GPS technology and maybe drone technology, is instead of spraying the whole field or spraying it equally, you can now more address the fertilizer where you most need it and see perhaps where there are spots where it's not grown as much and you need to address that. Is that more or less what?
Yeah, the VRT or variable rate technology is really helping out in that area. Like I said, not to put on any more than we need to. And there's also a variable rate end, but we also use stabilizers now to make sure that we hang on to that nitrogen all the way into the time when the crop most needs it. And it's just another management tool that we have in our toolbox to make sure that we're doing the right thing from an environmental standpoint.
If we went back in time to say 1960, there would be an average bushels per acre. How have we improved the productivity of bushels per acre on Illinois soils, say, over the last 50, 60 years?
Oh, my Lord. The pace of change and the increase in yields and technology, seed technology alone since that time it's just doubled. You know, it really has. and I don't know where we're headed with yield potential, but it's always going up. The yield trends is proof of that. You know, the yield trend number grows every year. It's on an upward drive, and so it's going to be a lot of bushels that get used up here as we go on.
And one of the things, like in any other field, technology can multiply your labor. So it used to be some years ago that somebody, I don't know what, I'm guessing, might have had 600 acres, and today one fellow can plow, what, 1,200, 1,500?
Oh, yeah, or more. I've seen some guys that are farming, up to 2,000 acres with, basically by himself, or maybe in a part-time employee, technology or different practices like no-till enable a guy to get over a lot of acres by himself if he needs to.
Looking at the Trump administrations, he took America out of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, from the Corn Growers Association. What is your guys' view on that and opening markets overseas?
Well, we are totally dependent on our export market. We all recognize that I think maybe NAFTA and both those trade agreements maybe needed some tweaking, but there was some good stuff in it too. Good trade agreements already set in place, and good relationships with those other countries. Mexico being one, they're our biggest corn customer now. We certainly don't want to have that relationship damaged at all, and we want to keep it going forward.
How big is Asia? I think, again, I'm speaking from relative ignorance, but over the last 70 years, the Asian diet has changed. It's become more westernized. They're eating more meat. And so, therefore, I would think that they're a growing market for corn growers as far as imports.
Oh, yeah. I think for corn and or soybeans, all the grains, people are wanting to improve their diets in every which way that they can, either through feed grains or through their livestock and the meat that they produce or purchase from us. So it's a big market for us.
And before we close out, one of the issues, and it's really across any number of fields, not just farming, but as the baby boomers retire, there's often not enough younger people in that field. I know that for the pipe fitters, they're facing that, but last I heard, the average age of a farmer was about 57, 58 years old. To what extent is that a concern? To what extent is it such a financial hurdle with the price of land, somewhere in the $12,000 to $15,000 an acre? The price of the combines here, you can put $500,000 or so in a combine.
That's right. Well, the young people that are coming on back to the farms today, first of all, we do need them. And I've got two sons that are farming with us now, and we're wanting our operation to be stable and grow. And but they've got a lot of challenges ahead because it is a very capital-intensive business to be in. Everything that we handle as far as inputs are pretty expensive every year, especially with the machinery, and like you mentioned, the land is awfully. It's a real financial burden sometimes to try to get that ground paid for.
Are the farmers coming up with any ideas that they're asking legislatively, either at the state or the national level?
There are programs to help these young farmers get started, and I'm hoping people can take advantage of that. Hopefully we need those kind of programs around.
What do those programs do as an example?
Well, they just help people get the financial backing and the start that they need to get their operations going. They need that kind of backing.
And lastly, again, like other industries, regulations can be a problem. Environmental, we talked about a little bit before. One of the things I think a lot of people haven't picked up what the Trump administration did is he signed an executive order to get rid of what was known as WOTUS, the Waters of the United States regulations. What would that have done to farming, and how is getting rid of that beneficial?
Well, getting rid of that, it just put a little bit more common sense into how we approach all our farming practices. I think that was an unrealistic attempt to regulate some things that here with our inland waterways, even just as simple as a waterway,
Am I right that the EPA wanted to extend their control over the waterways to what might have been even standing water on a farmer's field?
Yes, ponds and everything that's around that could be around a farming operation, and it was just a unrealistic overreach on our part or their part to regulate something that doesn't need to be done.
A big deal for farmers to get rid of that?
Oh yes, very much so.
As you look around here, everyone drools over machinery. Is there anything that gets you excited?
I tell you what, the technology into things these days is just amazing what comes to what they bring out here each and every year. But there's also some new paint around here I wouldn't mind getting a hold of, that's for sure. So.
Well, Martin, we appreciate you talking with us.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Hi, I'm Dave Treader, President of the Federation of Independent Illinois Colleges and Universities. For years, Illinois was known around the world for the quality of its colleges and universities, and not just our public universities, but the many private schools that do such a great job educating more students annually than the publics. Schools like Bradley University in Peoria, Millikan University in Decatur, Loyola University in Chicago, and Northwestern University in Evanston. These are just a few examples of the schools that not only educate the next generation, but also serve as economic engines for their communities, with tens of millions of dollars in payroll and the purchasing of millions of dollars in local services. In fact, the combined economic impact of Illinois' private colleges and universities is over $20 billion annually. Collectively, these schools account for $3.5 billion in state tax revenues annually. Illinois' independent colleges and universities are a key pillar of the economy, bringing billions of dollars to the Illinois economy, as well as adding a cultural richness to our communities. That's why it's important that the state programs like the Monetary Award Program, which enables low-income Illinois residents to attend college in our great state, remain funded. And it's also why it's important for all of us to understand the economic impact of our colleges and universities have on the Illinois economy and our communities. This is why I'm also happy to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council on Higher Education. Their statewide, in-depth coverage of the issues that impact our economy, our government, and our cultural resources help to inform us all on the issues that matter. I'm Dave Treader, President of the Federation of Independent Illinois Colleges and Universities, and proud to be a member of the Illinois Channel Advisory Council.
Next, from Springfield, we first talked to Liz Moranstelk, the Executive Director of the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, about the growth of Illinois' farmers markets throughout the state. We'll then talk to Rebecca Osland, the Policy Associate with the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, about Governor Rauner's recent legislation that has made it easier for people to sell their products at farmers markets. This runs about 20 minutes.
Liz Moran, thank you for joining us on the Illinois Channel. As we're here in Springfield at a farmer's market, and for those who haven't ever gone to a farmer's market, they probably vary a lot. This is one of how many would you guess across the state of Illinois? Just approximately.
Sure. Well, we think there's probably, there are probably at least 160 farmers markets. There could be many more because there are some that pop up in parking lots that aren't on any official map, but that's about how many we think there are.
And we're here, and this in Springfield happens, what, I think 2 days a week, is it?
Yeah, Illinois Stewardship Alliance operates the Old Capitol Farmers Market. We're here every Wednesday and Saturday morning from 8 till noon. And we have vendors all up and down 4th. We're at 4th and Adams in Springfield downtown. And we have up to 50 vendors, including farmers with produce, and also you can get lunch or breakfast here while you're at the market.
Now, when I was growing up, we didn't have any of these. Actually, except for, I grew up in St. Louis, they do have the Soulard Farmers Market that goes back, interestingly, to the 1700s, over 200 years. But typically you didn't have farmers markets as we do now. Why did this happen, to the extent that you know? Why did the Illinois Stewardship Alliance start this in Springfield? What's the point of it?
Yeah, so there have been, farmers markets have varied in size, but certainly have exploded in the last 10 or 15 years, where there's been a real renaissance of local food movement, where farmers who want to grow produce and to be able to make more money, they can sell direct by growing food that people want to buy to be able to make in their home, make at home for dinner or breakfast or lunch. And farmers markets are a place where we can gather and be able to market, so consumers can come to one place and get everything they need to be able to cook at home.
Is it just fruits and vegetables?
Nope. At the market we have everything from bread, desserts, pastas. What else is here?
Some meats, are they?
Yeah, sausages, and of course some of them are prepared, but a lot of stuff you can take home. And we love farmers markets because they create an opportunity both for the farmer, but also for consumers to find the most fresh, the most local food in their community. So a lot of the stuff you see here sold today was just picked yesterday.
So the farmers are here from riding a circuit, and they can make an income. And as we were talking off camera, I met some people that were saying in years past how some of these farmers, it really, maybe they weren't farmers before. Maybe they're now just vegetable farmers. But even some people who are in the corn and soybeans, which is the commercial, let's say, farming, will sell. Sometimes it might be a farmer's wife who has a couple of acres and bringing that out. And they can actually make a fair amount of money doing this. Let's talk about the alliance that you run. How long has this market been in existence, and financially, how do you perpetuate yourself?
Sure. So, Illinois Stewardship Alliance is a 40-year-old organization. We were founded originally we were really concerned about, or membership-based organization. We're based here in Springfield, and we're really concerned about the land and keeping family farmers on the land, because as stewards who take care of the land itself. And we've evolved in the last 10 years, especially to be working on the local and regional food system, because we see that as both really good for consumers and people, but also great for our economic development. And we know that keeping farmers on the land is great for the environment. It's great for farmers to be able to make a good living, and it's good for people to be able to access really great food. Illinois Stewardship Alliance has run the market for the last couple of years, but the farmers market itself it's maybe 20 years old. I think Jackie from Suttle's Garden has been selling for about 25 years, so it's got a long history in the community.
What's the season?
April through October, where that's and the height of the season. The most things that are in harvest are during August and September, which is a great time. We worry a lot about when school goes back in session and people get a lot busier, and the summer weekends seem to go away. We call it what we've experienced in the market is called the September slump, and we've been trying to overcome that by Illinois Stewardship Alliance is running. We call it an Eat Local Challenge, where we're asking consumers to commit in September to spend $20 a week at their local markets, and we provide materials from like what's in season and how to prepare it to a market bag, and we've got hundreds of people that have committed at least to the Central Illinois farmers markets.
How on sustaining yourself, I presume these farmers pay something for a space?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are vendor fees that in order to carve out the space and be able to have the administration for it. But we also have some really generous sponsors, including HS St. John's Hospital is a significant contributor, and we know they care a lot about making sure that healthy food is accessible in this community.
And if somebody wants to get into this, think that might be a fun way to make some side money, do they contact you? And how do you screen, if you do screen? I don't know if you do. How do you screen based on what, as far as who can come here and sell their wares?
Yeah, so Illinois Stewardship, we partner with the Downtown Springfield Incorporated, DSI. So if a farmer or food entrepreneur was interested in selling at the Old Capitol Farmers Market, they could get in touch with either of our organizations. But one thing we want to make sure, and our market vendors here are really committed to making sure that the food is coming from local production. And so we actually provide inspections, and we have a list of sort of values, including that the producers are actually growing or producing the food themselves, and because we know that we want consumers to trust that this is a market where they're going to find real local good food from regional family farmers.
And just before we close out on this, the thing is, some people are into organic, which has its own set of criteria. Other vegetables and fruits are grown in a non-organic way. Do you care one way or another here as an organization if it's organic or not?
Well, organic certification is incredibly expensive, and there are a lot of folks who grow without using sprays, but they don't get certification for it. We, as an organization, we value folks that are growing food without pesticides and sprays, and we recognize that sometimes is a necessity in order to keep your business operating. But we're really concerned about moving in the direction where all food is going to be grown in a way that is healthy both for people and for our natural resources.
And one of the things, and we're going to get into a little bit more detail about this, but occasionally, like any business, or you're a nonprofit, but still it's an economic enterprise, there's going to be regulations that may be affecting the business, and you bring it to the attention of lawmakers. In this case, the state legislature, so that, as I understand it, you could have uniformity across the state. Because what was the problem prior to some bills that were recently passed and signed by the governor?
Yeah, so look, food safety is absolutely a priority. We want people to come to the market and trust that what they're getting, especially if it's processed food, is produced safely and that isn't going to make anybody sick.
As I look around here, you seem to have a broad diversity of people coming. What kind of people do you find? Have you ever done any kind of surveys of the sorts of people that come out and use farmers market? Is there a broad diversity, and how expensive is it to buy food here versus, say, a grocery store?
Sure. Well, we are concerned that that food that's produced by folks that is not in the conventional market, it costs more to produce, but the value we know is better. And what we're committed to is making sure that kind of food can get in the hands of everybody that can get to the market. And so we work really hard to try to make sure that good food is affordable to everybody who comes to the market. And there is a whole variety of people that come. But one of the things we're really proud of is that this market has the technology to be able to accept SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is food stamps. And, it takes it's like a credit card system. It takes a lot of technology, but we're proud that we have it here. And not only do we accept SNAP, but we're part of a program called Double Up Bucks, where we will match every single dollar that's spent. So if someone comes here to be able to buy fruits and vegetables for their family, they're going to get a lot more here at the market than they can at the grocery store, because they come to our booth here and we issue them tokens and they take them to the farmers, and they're able to get twice as much here as they would at the grocery store. And the farmers love that, because it means that they're going to get the food that they value, that they worked hard to raise, into the hands of people who really need it and really appreciate it. And it's a win-win for everybody in our community.
As Governor Rauner has recently signed bills making it easier for people to sell their products at farmers markets, we talked to Rebecca Osland, the policy associate at the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, and get her thoughts on the legislation.
Rebecca Osland with the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, thanks for joining us. We often say at the Illinois Channel that public policy doesn't start and stop under the Capitol Dome, that these bills are made to address various issues. The governor recently signed 2 bills that you were instrumental in getting passed. What was the problem that those bills were trying to address vis-a-vis food markets?
Well, the overall problem, I would say, is making sure that as many products as farmers can safely produce and sell are available to our consumers at the market. So we were facing some challenges with different regulations from county to county as far as things like refrigeration, hand washing stations, as well as Illinois has had a cottage food law for a few years, which allows certain products to be made in home kitchens and sold. However, it was a very narrow law, and it really only allowed a few items and left a lot on the table that farmers really could be producing safely. So we wanted to add new foods to reduce food waste and give farmers that additional opportunity to sell more foods, as well as address this inconsistency from county to county. So that's how it became the 2 separate bills, even though they both deal with local food and farmers markets. It just kind of was more natural to split the issue into 2, or split the 2 issues into 2 bills.
And the governor then signed these bills into law, right? And so are they effective immediately?
No, they'll both be effective January 1st, which gives everybody time to adjust and learn what they do. And let the public health community, the inspectors, have some time to think about what these changes will be, and also give people some time to be brainstorming, coming up with creative ideas for what they want to sell next year.
So there's going to be uniformity in the regulations, right?
Right.
From one county to the next, I should say, where now there's not.
Right. So one of the bills, the Local Food Business Opportunities Act that we worked on with Senator Kaler and Representative Anderson, that bill will create statewide consistency in rules, like I mentioned, the refrigeration and hand washing stations. Those were two issues that we kept hearing complaints from farmers that they had to deal with different requirements in different places, and in some places it was cost prohibitive. So those were a couple of issues to knock out this year. We do hear additional complaints about things varying, but we hope to take up with the Farmers Market Task Force, which is an advisory body under the Illinois Department of Public Health. So if we can kind of pick up from where this bill made some progress and continue to work together with that Farmers Market Task Force, we hope to address issues as they arise and try to continue to create more consistency.
How do you hear from the farmers? What is the mechanism? Is it just by you visiting the farmers markets and asking for responses from the different vendors?
Well, Illinois Stewardship Alliance, we have a market manager here at the Old Capitol Farmers Market, so she really engages directly with all of the farmers and gets to hear from them and relay their concerns to me. And likewise, we have relationships with market managers in places like Champaign, up in the collar counties, and we can hear from those market managers and kind of get that top-level sense of what their markets are dealing with.
And as you look into the future and get feedback, are there other issues that you're looking to address on a forward-looking basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So the other bill that was signed into law this year was the Food Freedom Act, which is going to allow a lot more types of homemade foods, cottage foods, to be produced and sold. And
cottage food meaning what?
Cottage food is made in a home kitchen, labeled that it's been made in a home kitchen. The people who produce the food have to take food safety training. So there's protections built in at that front end, and then the labels let the customers know this was not inspected, so then it's consumer choice. But that will really help our farmers be able to take, for example, vegetables that they have no way of producing into a value-added good right now, and turn it into something that they can still sell at the market, whether it's chopped frozen vegetables that are like take-home soup kits, or frozen salsas. They can certain things like pickles, fermented foods, which are totally not allowed right now, only jams, jellies, and baked goods, and dried herbs. That's all we're limited to right now. So we're already hearing from a lot of farmers creative ideas of what they're thinking of doing next year, so that they have a use for all this leftover produce. And
yeah, because everyone, I mean, who grows vegetables, not everyone, but a lot of people are canning at the end of the year to preserve their crop, and certainly the farmers might have stuff that was unsold. Maybe they can turn it into a relish or something that they can sell, right?
Yeah, there's all kinds of things that they can do now.
And that becomes effective for the 2018.
Correct. And looking forward, some of the other policy that we plan to take up will really tie into that Food Freedom Act. Last year, we passed a bill with a big coalition of health and hunger groups and other food and farming groups that created a state program that would fund the double value SNAP, the food stamps at the farmers markets, so that, for example, if I spent $50 on a SNAP card, I could get a match of $25 to spend on fruits and vegetables. That would be applicable to some of these new cottage foods, as long as there isn't salt and sugar and fat added to it. Any of these processed, frozen vegetables, you'd be able to use that matching incentive to get more fruits and vegetables, processed or unprocessed. Now, that bill passed last year. It was even unanimous in the House, but it didn't get funded, and it was mandatorily vetoed to become a pilot program. So it would expire in 2019 if we do nothing. So next year we're looking at at least trying to get that extended and then keep talking to the legislators about why it's a worthwhile investment to actually make the appropriation.
Is that, when we say a pilot program, is that going to be a pilot program statewide or in a regional area?
The rules would be written by the Department of Human Services, and they have until the end of next year, I believe, to write the rules. So we'll have to talk with them. Correct. So we're not looking at enough time to do a real pilot program, especially because it hasn't gotten the funding yet. So we'd like to try to get the program, make it permanent, but we at least need to make it extended so that it doesn't just expire unused.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.
Next, from Springfield, we sit down with Alan Manning, author of Father Lincoln, the untold story of Abraham Lincoln and his boys. Manning describes Lincoln's relationship with his children and how being a father affected his presidency. This runs about 40 minutes.
Alan Manning, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you for having me.
You are the author of Father Lincoln, and a lot of people would say, another book on Lincoln, what more could be said? In fact, you note in your book, a famous historian said back in 1936, questioned whether the Lincoln theme had been exhausted back then. Why do we need another book on Abraham Lincoln?
Well, there's so much about his life that still has not been told. One of the things that I discovered to my surprise was that there had not been a full-length book on Lincoln and his relationship with his sons. Lincoln in his role as a father. There had been some articles written about it. Of course, all Lincoln biographies will touch on it, but there had not really been an in-depth study on that topic. And so I saw an opportunity to tell a story that had not yet been told.
Why does it matter how Lincoln was as a father?
I think we can always learn a lot from Abraham Lincoln, and I think that one of the stories here is that this reveals a very human side to Lincoln, a side that we don't always see. When we think of Abraham Lincoln, we tend to picture that larger-than-life figure, the great emancipator, the savior of the Union. Sometimes we forget that he was a man, and there were parts of his life that were very ordinary. And Lincoln, in his role as a father, was really one of those parts. And there's a lot of things that ordinary fathers today can relate to. He did things that most fathers do. He read bedtime stories to his kids. He helped them with their homework. I have a whole chapter in the book on when he sent his eldest son, Robert, off to college. Those are all experiences that ordinary fathers today have.
You start the book, and first I would congratulate you. It's filled with detail. In fact, so much I sometimes, as I'm reading this, would say, "How do you know that?" You know. How did you research the book? I mean, just as a quick aside, it's not just about Abraham Lincoln and how he played with his sons. So, on somewhat, I would say to the viewers, it's almost when we say Father Lincoln that it's about him as a father. It's really not just about that. You cover a lot of territory and bring in a whole lot of history. One of the, and again, it's filled with details. One of the things that I thought was funny, and I didn't know, that Lincoln had agreed to marry a woman before he had ever laid eyes upon her, which is bizarre. And then he sees her, and she's obese and missing teeth.
Right, and he felt trapped, and he wasn't sure how to get out of it, and he finally was just resigned to fulfilling a promise that he had made to marry her, and she ended up dumping him, and in a way he was mortified. He was sort of, as I think I said in the book, he was half relieved and half mortified, relieved that he was out of the obligation to marry her, but mortified at the fact that this woman would actually dump him.
Yeah, how bad am I, right?
Yeah, yeah. But no, it's.
What was it? Was it just
customary? I mean, no one would think of doing that. Or is it a sign of how, was he so naive at a younger age that
well,
he would do that?
He was getting into his late 20s, which at that time was a little bit old to still be unmarried.
A single guy.
And so he had a friend, a woman friend, who had, I think it was a sister, and he had met her once before many years earlier. He didn't have a detailed recollection of her, but thought, well, she's okay. And so the sister sent for her to come on the condition that Lincoln would marry her.
And so, again, I would say to the viewers, that's one of the things that having read the book, there's so many interesting details like that you can learn little aspects of his life that we know the broad themes and chronology, perhaps, but there's still an interesting myriad of detail. And as you say, each of those kind of add like a mosaic to our understanding of him and put his actions on the world stage into some better understanding of what he was like, struggling with both as an individual as well as a public figure.
Sure, and one of the things that I tried to do in the book was to bring some context to the story as well. You asked about the research. A lot of the research that I did was on fatherhood culture in that era. What were most fathers like? Did Lincoln fall into that pattern of being a typical 19th century or early 19th century father? And so a lot of the work I did was to study what had been written and researched about fatherhood culture in that time.
What did you learn?
Well, a couple things that I think some people might be surprised of. I think that based on movies and things, we tend to have pictured fathers in the 19th century as being detached, unemotional, sort of that patriarchal type figure. And that might have been more true in the 18th century, but moving into the 19th century, into the early 1900s, there was a change going on in fatherhood culture where fathers were less patriarchal, were more willing to have emotional attachments to their kids. Some of it had to do with the fact that in many parts of the country, men were moving off of the farms and into cities. And so they were living a different kind of a lifestyle. Instead of being a farmer, they were white-collar type workers, and Lincoln was representative of that. He grew up on a farm with his father, and his father was the older style patriarch, stern disciplinarian, not emotional, not really interested in seeing Lincoln have a life outside of the farm. Thought that living on the farm as a subsistence farmer was sufficient. Lincoln saw more. He saw the opportunities in urban America. That comes with some changes to fatherhood culture, because now the role of the father is not to simply get the kids out on the farm to help them subsist, but the father's job is to go off during the day, earn a living, then come back home.
And one of the things you talk about earlier in the book is Lincoln's relationship with his own father, which was not good. And as you recount, he didn't do a number of things that he might have done that expose his lack of affection, Lincoln's lack of affection for his father, Thomas,
right.
Including when his father dies, he doesn't go to the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn about that relationship, and to what extent did Lincoln take his relationship with his father and use that as a way that he structured his own parenting with his boys?
I think that most fathers learn about how to be a father from their own fathers. That's their own fathers were their primary mentors. And I think that most fathers try to take what they thought their fathers did well and repeat that, and take what they think their fathers didn't do so well and then do something different. And that was really Lincoln's experience. He, for the most part, had a very difficult relationship with his father, and I think didn't think his father was a good father. And so in his own parenting, for the most part, he tried to really do things differently. Thomas was a very stern disciplinarian. Lincoln was very lax. Thomas had put no emphasis on education. Lincoln saw to it that at least Robert and Willie got an education. Robert, of course, went on to college. Willie passed away when he was very young. But at the same time, there were some struggles where he perhaps wanted to break free, but perhaps couldn't. With Tad's education, he was a little more lax with Tad than with the other two boys, perhaps reflecting a difficulty tearing away from his own father's lack of emphasis on education. And so there are examples where he struggles a little bit. I talk a little bit in the book about favoritism. You know, one of the things that Lincoln always felt was that Thomas's favorite was Lincoln's stepbrother, John Johnston. And you know, I think it's always hurtful to a child if you think that one of your parents favors one of your other siblings. And Lincoln felt that with Johnston, and yet Lincoln. Many people said that Lincoln had a favorite child in Willie. So there were things that Robert did, or things that Thomas had done that Lincoln repeated.
And let me lay the foundation that for the viewers, in case they don't know. So Lincoln and Mary, his wife, had 4 boys together. Robert, Eddie, Willie, and Ted. And of the 4, they lost 2 of them while Lincoln was living.
Right.
The first was Eddie, who passed away at the age of 4, I believe, while they were living here in Springfield.
Correct.
What impact did that? Now, back then, of course, we didn't have antibiotics, and it was not unusual for parents to lose a child,
right.
Which might have been, I wondered about, one of the reasons why men were maybe a little more detached, because it was almost expected that you were going to lose a child at some point. When Eddie died, and he was, I believe, the second, Robert was the first,
right.
What impact did that have on Lincoln and his life?
Yeah, I think this is one of the extraordinary things in this story is that what you said is true. The infant mortality rate at that time was very high, and parents were really taught in the culture coming out of the 18th century into the 19th century, the culture was to try to not grieve, to simply accept the death of a child and to move on. And the Lincolns, both of them really, were part of a changing culture that would really openly grieve at the loss of a child. And in Eddie's case, there were a couple of impacts on Lincoln. One was it was a big milestone in his faith journey. Lincoln began, after Eddie's death, to read the Bible more. He tended to invoke God's name more in his speeches. Lincoln's religion is a subject of some controversy. It's still being written on today, and there are some people who say, well, he wasn't a Christian or he was a deist. But certainly in Eddie's death, Lincoln turned to God for comfort, and really I think it was one of the first steps in a faith journey that would really continue for the rest of his life. So that was certainly one impact. The other thing was, I think it showed a resilience on Lincoln's part in that as tragic as it is to lose a child, of course, one of the things that the parents have to do is go on. And Lincoln had a responsibility to his family. He needed to continue to support them. And so despite his grieving, he had to go back to work, and he did.
In fact, I think you would say that he didn't just go back to work, but that he used work in addition to reading the Bible and considering is there a God, and he used his work as a distraction from his grief.
Right. No, there's no doubt about it. I think one of the themes that runs throughout the book is...
To join, so he used his work as a distraction from grief, and that, therefore, of course, because he worked harder at his career, elevated him further in the legal, over
Correct.
time, in the legal field, and became his reputation among the legal community, and therefore some of the more powerful and influential people in the city grew, right?
Correct, yeah, and I think one of the themes that really runs throughout the book is that it's a story about Lincoln, but it's a story about fatherhood, and it's a story about someone who has a busy career, a career that they love, and how they balance that career with their roles and responsibilities as a father. And we see that in the story of Eddie's death, of Lincoln grieving at the loss, and it was a very deep grief that he experienced, but still having to go on and continue to build his career.
Later on, of course, Lincoln's elected president, and this is where I have often wondered myself. Here, Lincoln fighting the Civil War, which would have been among the most challenging of any presidencies, with the, I guess, possible exception of maybe FDR fighting World War II in both cases, but to have that on your shoulders, and then while he is president, he loses another son, and arguably that was his favorite.
Yeah. So as you said, the oldest was Robert, then Eddie was born, and then Eddie passed away. Shortly after Eddie passed away, Mary got pregnant again, had Willie and Tad. Now, right about the time Lincoln got elected president, Robert went off to college. He went off to Harvard. So when Lincoln entered the White House, he only took Willie and Tad with him. And Willie, about a year after Lincoln became president, Willie contracted what was described at the time as bilious fever. It's really a form of typhoid, and they think he got it from playing in the swamps around Washington. And after a brief illness, he passed away. And so Lincoln had that to deal with. So he had about a year where he had the two boys in the White House, and I go into a lot of detail about their various antics around the White House, and they would barge into cabinet meetings and so forth. And then after Willie passed away, now it was just Tad with him in the White House, and really Lincoln became Tad's best friend at that point. But it is a remarkable story that he was able to have that close relationship with Tad while being president during this very tumultuous time.
And I've always just thought, how does one go on? It's hard enough when you lose a child, but to be president, and as you said earlier, he had to go on as a father. Here he had to go on as president. He didn't have time to take himself out in his grief as president and, take some time off. That wasn't an option.
Yeah, there was about a 1 or 2 week period right after Willie's death where Lincoln was very distracted. He went to the cemetery twice in the week after Willie's death and went to the vault where Willie's casket was and actually opened the vault and just gazed at Willie's body in the casket. He was very broken up about it and was distracted for about a week or so. In fact, the newspapers actually carried a couple of articles reporting on how the president is doing in the couple weeks following Willie's death.
To what extent did Lincoln's relationship and having kids, he was one of the first presidents in quite some time to have children, was it a help or a hindrance having kids while he was trying to be president with all that he had on his plate with the Civil War?
Yeah. I think it was a help. They were certainly rambunctious, engaged in some antics, interrupted him, they got on the nerves of some of his cabinet members and some of the White House staff. And in that way, it was very different than really almost all of the presidents that had come before. Most of the presidents who had come before him, they had kids, but they were grown by the time they had entered the White House. So it was new for there to be these wild kids running around the White House. But Lincoln was really a very involved father with them, and so he made time for them. He would take time away from the office to go play with them up in the attic when they were playing up in the attic. He would not necessarily shoo them out of the cabinet meeting right away when they would come in. He tended to them. I think that may provided a measure of relief for him as he was dealing with the nation's problems.
And we just kind of touched on this, but Lincoln as a father, as you said, his father, Thomas, was very disciplinarian, had used a belt, I believe, on Lincoln, and so Lincoln was not going to have any of that as a father. And as you write, and in fact here at the Lincoln Presidential Museum, as you go through and there are displays, one of the displays is Lincoln reading a book on a couch while his children are frolicking in the office, so they make note of that. And that happened even as he was here as a lawyer with the Herndon law firm, or Lincoln Herndon.
Yeah.
That whether it was they would be.
They drove Herndon crazy. Yeah.
You know, playing, and he would let them go, and so he did that even when he was president.
Yeah, he did. And in fact, one story I talk about in there is he took Tad one time over to the telegraph office, which was a short walk from the White House, to get the latest dispatches from the war. And Tad got into the ink wells where they keep the ink for the pens, and got it on his fingers and smeared it all over the tables. And one of the men who was in charge of the telegraph office was appalled by this, and grabbed Tad by the collar and walked him over to Lincoln and made him show his hands. And instead of chastising Tad for making such a mess, Lincoln just said, "Come on, Tad, let's go back home. Buell's abusing you," and left. So he was a very forgiving parent as well.
When Willie died, Willie was 11 years old. Tad was just how old?
He would have been about 9.
And how did Lincoln's relationship with Tad? What was his relationship with Tad after Willie's death?
Yeah, they really became very, very close. They were close, but even closer. And part of it was for this reason. When the Lincolns first arrived at the White House, there was a couple in town that had 2 boys that were about the same age. This was Horatio Taft, who worked in the patent office. And Willie and Tad became really good friends with these 2 boys. And they did a lot of things together. Those boys would spend the night at the White House sometimes. They would even attend some of the functions. When Willie died, Mary was very upset, just as Lincoln was, and she actually told those 2 playmates that they could not attend the funeral because she said that they reminded her too much of Willie. She just didn't want to see them sitting at the funeral. It turns out Mary herself didn't go to the funeral. She was too upset to go. But after the funeral, when now it was just Tad, Mary essentially banned those 2 young boys from the White House. She just thought they reminded her too much of Willie. So Tad lost his 2 playmates. And so Lincoln really became his primary playmate. And so they tended to spend more time together. And even some of the White House staff and Lincoln's cabinet secretaries who used to complain about their antics now, in a way, felt sorry for Tad and tended to give him a pass more. I think I mentioned one time in there where Tad squirted Secretary of War Stanton with a water hose and got some of his papers wet. And if you know or read about Stanton's personality, ordinarily that would have caused quite a blow up. But instead, Stanton took it in good humor.
And I would think that Tad was some relief to Lincoln, who had all kinds of pressure, of course. and his relationship with Mary was not one that he necessarily found solace in her company. Often she was just a cause for more angst.
Sure.
She was a spendthrift and would go out and spend all kinds of money as First Lady, and as you write, money the Lincolns didn't have, and then that became an issue after his passing.
Yeah, and I think, and I do say in here that I think you can, in some ways, say that Lincoln, the time that he would like to spend with Tad, was a relief from Mary, a getaway. And in fact, one of the trips that they took together toward the end of the book was when Lincoln and Tad went down to Richmond. That was without Mary, and so they would spend a few days together, just father and son. And he would take them out to visit the troops, and he would take them on walks.
What kind of things on that topic? What things did Lincoln do with the boys over the years? Did he take them fishing? Did he play games with them? What did he do in his downtime when he was spending time with the boys?
Yeah, one of the things that I talk about, you had earlier used the word frolic, and frolic was it's a term that's not so much used anymore, but in the 19th century was used quite frequently, and it was really referring to getting down on the floor and rolling around and playing, romping. And it was a sign of closeness between a father and their children. And Lincoln did that. He did that both in Springfield and in the White House. So he did things like that. He did play games with them. He brought them to the office, as he said, and I think that's one of the great parts of Lincoln's life as a father, is that he was able to show his children what he did at the office. So he did that. He did not take them hunting. I make the point in the book that hunting was something that never interested Lincoln. I don't think I found any evidence that he took them fishing. He might have, but I didn't mention that anywhere in the book. But he would take them sometimes on official duties, again, to review troops sometimes. He took Robert out several times. Robert, he actually sent on as a sort of an official representative of the government a couple of times. He sent him as a representative at a funeral, for example, when Robert was in college. So he involved the kids in his career some.
Now, Robert was the first, and ironically, he was the only boy to reach full manhood. Mm-hmm. Tad ends up dying after Lincoln's passing.
Right.
And what was he, about 18?
He was about 18.
And what did he die of?
Without autopsies, they don't know for sure, but they think it was some type of a lung disease. There's been some recent writings that it might have been something else, some form of a cancer, but historically it's been just considered some type of a lung disease.
And on one hand, this is indirectly, the fact that only one of his four boys lived to full manhood was that there are no descendants of Abraham Lincoln still living.
That's right.
I think the last died in the mid-1980s.
Yes. Robert, who did live to adulthood, had, I believe, 2 children, but his only boy died at the age of 16. And then his daughter did live to adulthood, had a couple of kids, but those kids, I believe, did not have children. And the last one of them died, I think you said, in the 1980s.
There's some question of Lincoln's, sometimes when someone becomes a father, they have to, feel their way. They're new to the job, so to speak, and their relationship with their firstborn is different than the third or fourth one, and often they're more forgiving of the later children because they've kind of realized the error of their ways, maybe being too strict. What was Lincoln's relationship with Robert?
Yeah.
Who ended up, by the way, becoming a very successful executive, I think a railroad executive, and his mansion is still in Vermont.
Vermont, yeah. First, I will say that there's somewhat less information out there on Robert's younger years, and in part it's because, of course, Lincoln wasn't famous when Robert was young, and so there's fewer observations of Lincoln and Robert. Also, when Robert was young, is when Lincoln tended to be away from home quite a bit. He was out riding the circuit, as many lawyers did back then. And so Robert probably saw less of Lincoln than the younger boys did. But I try to make the argument in the book that they still had a very close relationship, and I document the times that they were together, the things that Lincoln did to help Robert in school. As I mentioned, the chapter on him sending him off to college, and it was not the case where he just simply sent Robert off and that was it. He went and visited him on the East Coast just before he ran for president, and they had several days together, and they traveled around and spent a lot of time in Robert's room talking. They went to church together. And so I think a lot of people have concluded that Lincoln and Robert didn't have a close relationship, but I really try to show otherwise. And part of that conclusion that others have had is based on some of Robert's own words. He wrote one time when he was asked for some information on Lincoln's personal life that, well, right about the time he became president, I went off to college, and I hardly spent 10 minutes with him after that. And that was demonstrably false, that he had only spent a short amount of time with Lincoln while he was off at college. He used to come home for Christmas break. As I mentioned, Lincoln went and visited him shortly before he became president. He consulted with Robert on matters of the war. Robert would send in requests for a friend would like this appointment or that appointment. They had a lot of communication with each other. There was the whole question of whether Robert should join the Army, and Lincoln and Mary at first didn't want him to because they'd already lost 2 boys at that time. Eventually, Lincoln allowed him to join, arranged for him to be on Grant's staff. And so there's really a lot of information out there, particularly in the later years, where Lincoln and Robert, I think, were very close.
In the, I wonder, I don't know if you have, this is maybe reaching to ask you something that you may not know, but is there any indication to say, because on one hand, what I'm getting at is, how did Lincoln, being a father, influence his presidency? Now, here he's fighting the Civil War, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands and thousands on a regular basis of young men who were Robert's age, were dying, and here Lincoln knew the grief of losing sons.
Right.
Did that have any bearing on him? Did it add to his woes and his emotional burden that he had to carry as president, and make him certainly not less? I would have thought it would not make him less caring about those losses, but more.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely it did. I think that having lost 2 boys already made him keenly aware of the pain that would be suffered by the families of the soldiers who were fighting. I don't think there's any question about that. And also the struggle that he had with Robert and whether Robert should join the Army. It actually kind of highlighted, I think, a dilemma for Lincoln, because on the one hand he was sending these other boys off to battle, and many thought he was at the same time trying to protect his son, and in a way it became a political issue for him. Now eventually he let Robert go, although he went off to a fairly safe part of the war. But
he was trying to protect him, that wasn't
he? Oh, there's no question he was trying to protect him, and he was doing that, I think, perhaps some for himself, but largely Mary was really adamant that he not go. But as it became clear that the war was coming to an end in late 1864, Lincoln finally gave in and let Robert go. And another factor in that was Robert had started law school. He graduated from Harvard, and he said, since you won't let me join the Army, I guess I'll go ahead and start law school. And he hated law school. He found it very boring. And so I think that there may have been a conversation over his Christmas break in late 1864 with his father where he finally convinced his father to let him go. But it was a difficult decision for Lincoln, having already lost the 2 boys.
Let's talk a little bit about putting on the book before we close out, because one of the things, as I noted, that I found interesting was just the level of detail. How long did it take you to write the book? How much time did you spend on researching, and where do you find all this detail? The little intricacies I mean, I can imagine you finding the headline knowledge.
Right.
It's the level of detail within the book that surprised me.
Well, I was practicing law at the time I wrote the book full-time, so I was working on it really part-time in my spare time, and I would say I wrote maybe 80% of it over two and a half year period, and that included doing the research. I then put it aside for a while and finished it up a couple years later. I spent time here at the Lincoln Library here in Springfield going through some papers, things that had never been published before. One of the, I think, neat things that I found were some letters that were written by Lincoln's neighbors in Springfield, not letters to the Lincolns, but letters to other family members that contained observations on the Lincoln family, and that gave a real insight into the lives of the Lincoln family while they were back here in Springfield. I went through, of course, Lincoln's own papers, letters, many of which have been published. I went through letters, diaries of people close to Lincoln, his cabinet members, looking for observations that they had on Lincoln as a father. Newspapers that were relevant at the time, some of which, particularly when he was president, would occasionally contain references to the kids and things that the kids were doing. But it also helped me place Lincoln. I was able to chronicle how much was he away from home, how much time was he home, the trip from Springfield to Washington, D.C., which Robert accompanied him on. All of that stuff, a lot of that can be found in newspapers of the time. I found things in libraries and archives really all over the country. And one of the great things today with the internet is that if there's a letter in an obscure library somewhere, I don't necessarily have to go there. I can email them, they can copy it for me and send it to me. So that was a big help.
Is there a source of documents out there that you can look through to then contact a library and say, hey, I want to see that letter?
Yeah, I might find a reference to that letter in someone else's work. And I acknowledge in the book, I think one of the extraordinary things about Lincoln, since so much has been written on him, I think for a biographer writing a new book, we owe a debt of gratitude to those who have come before us, because they have done so much of the work uncovering a lot of these sources. And so I would often find references to sources in other books and then try to locate them myself. And so, yeah, Lincoln stuff is all over the place, but it was certainly a pleasure to be looking for it and finding it.
And lastly, you were motivated to write the book. You had some impressions of, obviously we all have impressions of Abraham Lincoln. To what extent did your writing this book change any of your perceptions of who Lincoln was?
Yeah. I think there are a couple things. One was I feel like I dispelled this notion that Lincoln wasn't close to Robert. I think that has been a fairly common theme throughout general biographies on Lincoln, and I think I show a different side of that. I also think that it reveals this very human side of this man that, again, we tend to think of as a larger-than-life figure, and I think it's important for us to see that. And then, in a larger sense, what I tried to do was write it in such a way that a father reading the book can have a takeaway from it. You know, okay, Lincoln was this way as a father. What can I learn from that? Maybe how can I be a better father? And I think that Lincoln, in a lot of ways, was at his best as a father when he was combining his career with his fatherhood, when he would take the kids to the office with him or discuss what he did at the office with them. You know, I think as fathers, sometimes we want to put a wall up between our careers and our fatherhood. We come home at the end of the day, we're tired, we don't necessarily want to talk about what we did at the office, but our kids need to know what we do. They need to know what our careers are all about. And I think that Lincoln, in sharing his career with his kids, that really made him a better father, and I think that's something we can all learn from.
All right, well, Alan Manning, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us, and the book is Father Lincoln. Thank you.
Thank you.